Language is amazing. If you're interested in an amazing life, language is essential for having an amazing life. Amazing exists in language. There's no such thing as amazing except in language. If I actually dig a hole somewhere, that hole is not just in language, but is actually wherever I dig it, right? No one can fill up that hole by only using language. But the difference between an amazing hole and just any other hole is entirely in language. So somehow we develop the capacity for language. Then we develop language, and soon we encounter variations in language and even inconsistencies in language. We encounter inconsistencies between different ways of identifying the same thing, between different patterns of relating, like is the whole amazing or not so amazing, and between our own direct observations of actuality and our own direct observations of language, like conflicts or inconsistencies between our own direct observations of actuality, like there's a hole right there, and our own direct observations of language, like a sign that says no holes allowed, and yet there's a hole right there. So here's another example of an inconsistency between our own direct observations of actuality and our own direct observations of language. The following statement: these are not words. That's a contradiction. Contradictions only exist in the realm of diction, as in speaking or words or language. Words are the origin of nonsense, of pretense, and of irony. Words are also the origin of labels and claims and interpretations and opinions. Some opinions are amazing. The ones that are the same ones as mine, those are the amazing ones. Words and language are distinct from all the rest of reality. In the rest of reality, there is no such thing as a contradiction. Language is the realm of contradictions and paradoxes and claims and opinions and interpretations and labels. Words and language are certainly part of our real experience, for words and language also influence attention, perception, and behavior. For instance, when two people or two groups, such as nations, both claim to own or control the same region of land, so more than one claim, and the claims are inconsistent, okay? I exclusively have control of this land, and then someone else says, no, we exclusively have control of this land, or they exclusively have control of this land, or whatever. So there's some contradiction in terms of the claims being presented, right? So that contradiction of claims in language, because it's a contradiction in language and not in any other part of reality, because there's only contradictions in that part of reality known as language. There's no contradictions outside of language. So that contradiction in language is irresolvable within the realm of language. How is the contradiction going to be resolved? How is it going to be that from this contradiction, like a statement like these are not words, how are we going to have a consistent thing between the actual control of land and the claim of who has control of it, if anyone? It's not going to be in language. That resolution can't be in language. In language, you have the conflicting or contradicting claims. Even these are not words. There's no resolving that in language. Language includes contradictions, some of which are simply logically irresolvable. There's nothing that language can do to resolve them. There's nothing that can be done in language to resolve them. So, how does such a contradiction in language get resolved. The resolution must be through some other aspect of reality, some other form of behavior besides language. The control or linguistic ownership claim of a certain region of land does not exist in language or does not originate in language. The label of ownership does exist in language, but that label is meaningless and irrelevant unless there is practical control or influence or dominance. Posting a sign or a notice that says, "This is now mine," or "No holes allowed," that does not change the locks on a building, the presence of holes. The sign or the notice, which has language on it, you can tack it into the ground and put it out there. Well, all you've done is made a little hole where the sign goes. The language is for influencing the attention, perception, and behavior of humans, but it doesn't affect termites or rats, and it might not affect humans, especially those who don't speak that language or don't read that language of whatever the sign or notice is. So language doesn't change the locks on a building. Language doesn't remove the inhabitants, like not directly. If people walk out as a result of language, so be it. But saying there's no one in the building doesn't empty it out. There's still whoever there is in it, and then there's this saying, the building is now empty, when it's either empty or not. But that's completely independent of language. So, control. Practical control is independent of language, though language can also be a tool for exerting control or influence, at least in relation to humans. In other words, if I actually dig a hole somewhere, that hole is not just in language, but is actually wherever I dug it. So no one can fill up that hole only by using language. No one can make a hole only by using language. Holes are entirely independent of language, but we have this label in language called hole. And I can say, after I've dug a hole, I dug a hole. Or I can say there's a hole, or say nothing. Language doesn't change the presence of the hole or the absence of, if there aren't any holes, language is completely uninfluential. It's completely without influence, except in those realms of interacting with certain other humans that have, you got to be able to hear if you're speaking. Someone, in order for speaking to influence them, they have to be able to hear, and they have to be able to understand the language and whatever else is required for language to actually influence the attention, perception, and behavior of other people. So language is exclusively for influencing the attention, perception, and behavior of other people. Language by itself does not lift a shovel or move dirt or fill holes or create holes. Language is just a form of human behavior, among many others. At a certain stage in social development, an individual may think of language as more powerful than it actually may be, more influential than it really is. Beyond that stage, one may recognize the precise utility and influence of language, as well as the precise utility and influence of any other form of behavior, which could previously have been obscured by labels, like labels that says this one is really valuable and that one is not valuable. Well, those labels may be consistent or not. Those labels are just in language. Whenever language is present, the possibility of consistency and inconsistency is immediately present. There's no inherent consistency in language, that language will be consistent with actuality. That's not guaranteed. So, beyond that stage, one may, beyond an initial stage of the development of language, in terms of a stage of social development, or we could even say intellectual or spiritual development, fine. Beyond that initial stage of the development of language, where we may think that language might be more influential than it actually is, one may also recognize the precise utility and influence of other forms of behavior, human behavior, of course, included, as well as things like the behavior of clouds and rain and solar flares from the sun and all other developments. If there are a bunch of birds that just fly right towards, an observer. Well, that's not an event in language. That's not behavior in language. The dog barking, the dog biting, the dog, you know, um, eating. None of those things are events in language. But language can describe them and acknowledge them, and that's fine. Language can obscure them. Language can distract from them. Language can do lots of things, but language is distinct from all other forms of reality. Things like electricity, sunlight, rainfall, dogs, whatever. Rats, termites, locks on the door. So language does not change night into day. Language does not change a hole into a hill or a hill into a hole. Language does influence the attention, perception, and behavior of other people. In fact, everything influences the attention, perception, and behavior of other people, including the image that's on the blog there. If you look at it, it's going to affect your attention, your perception, and it could affect your behavior even. Everything affects attention and perception, and even behavior, whether it's behavior on the level of cells and hormones and subatomic particles and electricity and electromagnetism, or speech, or whatever else. Everything is a behavior that influences attention, perception, and behavior. Language is one form of behavior, one form of influence over attention, perception, and behavior, at least of humans. And that's what language is, and it's amazing. And if you want an amazing life, language can be useful in declaring amazing life is present. What's the difference between amazing life is present and whatever was present prior to that linguistic behavior of declaring an amazing life is present? Nothing. But life may be inherently amazing. Language may be inherently amazing, and when we recognize that, that really could be useful for accessing and experiencing an amazing life, including with the use of language.